X-Men 97 Episode 3, Fire Made Flesh is downright diabolical. It's evil. One might even call it sinister.
I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
Spoiler warning for Episode 3 and potential plot points for future episodes. But let's go ahead and get into Episode 3. The intro is still fire, obviously. Interestingly, the sequence has no Storm in the character intro section. Since she's not currently on the team, that makes sense. Also, I didn't mention this last time, but from Episode 2 onward, each intro features numerous callbacks to iconic moments from the original animated series, such as Storm's defeat of Callisto in the Episode 2 intro. Episode 3 follows suit with the X-Men's first fight with Magneto, which ironically took place in Episode 3 of the OG series. We also have Jean being taken over by the Phoenix, Roberto running into a fence while being chased by a crowd of angry humans, just like Jubilee was in the OG show, Lilandra from the Shi'ar Empire smashing a spaceship console with Professor X in the background, and Rogue and Gambit sharing a special Rogue kiss, where she puts her gloved hand over Gambit's mouth and kisses it instead of his lips as to not harm him with her powers, which is actually a reference to a very iconic Gambit and Rogue panel from the comics. Episode 3 picks up right where 2 left off, with the second Jean Grey stumbling into the X-Mansion, asking for help before passing out. And after watching this episode, I almost passed out too, just because of how much stuff we're hit with. Not only do we learn the true identity of the second Jean, but we learn why she's here, where she comes from, what that means for the rest of the team, especially Scott, especially the newborn baby Nathan Summers, aka Cable, and who's behind the whole dual genes thing in the first place. We also see each current member of the X-Men face their deepest fears within the X-Mansion, literally, and so much more. On one hand, X-Men 97 carries on the OG show's ability to summarize, adapt, or reference stories and moments from the comic books while ultimately doing its own thing. This allows them to respect the source material while being free to forge their own path. But on the other hand, it's another example of the breakneck speed pacing that I brought up in my last video. This was originally a Saturday morning cartoon, and they're not exactly known for their decompressed storytelling. Stuff just kinda keeps happening. That's just what happens when you take something that was originally written for long form storytelling and try to condense it to a couple episodes or a movie. So far, it hasn't brought up any problems, and I'm gonna allow myself to be hopeful going forward, and at the very least, the show makes room for very deep and complex emotions to be played out. But there is something on the horizon, something that's coming, something that you know is coming if you saw Episode 2 or if you've looked at the titles of the upcoming episodes. And that is something that really requires you to take your time. You probably already know what it is, but just in case you don't, I'm gonna be vague right now. Anyway, let's move on to the spoiler territory, cause we got some things to talk about. With some great misdirection, the team and the viewers are led to believe that this new gene is some sort of alternate gene. But Beast conducts some tests which reveals that this new gene is actually the real gene, and the gene that we've been with from episodes 1 and 2 is the false gene, a clone. Now, if you're familiar with X-Men comic book lore, then you know exactly who this is and where this is going. This is Madeline Pryor, aka the Goblin Queen. She was created by Mr. Sinister for the express purpose of having a baby with Scott, who Mr. Sinister could then take and make into like the perfect mutant or the perfect specimen, one who would be invincible and would have the best powers of both Jean Grey and Scott Summers. I mean, he's a scientist. He's always looking to make the best or the newest or the most cutting edge something, so that's pretty on brand for him. It's also evil as fuck, so also on brand. By the way, we get another "ha, he said the thing" moment when Beast says, "Oh, my stars and garters" later on in the episode. I gotta give another moment to Morph. They made this man so dope in this show. Yes, I know he looked different. Yes, I know he's non-binary. Yes, he most definitely has a thing for Wolverine. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, as many other people are boning or want to bone each other, or one person want to bone another person in this X-Mansion, I don't see the problem with one of those situations being a person with a very hairy ass who wants to bone a person with a very, very, very hairy ass. I mean, it's kind of just what happens in this franchise. Speaking of wanting to bone, the moment when they came out the danger room,
Let's look at the schedule and see who's up next. Looks like Magneto and Rogue have the danger room next. Oh, and all tomorrow too. Wow. Rogue's really training her stamina with the new boss.
It don't say that. Stay on patrol.
Okay.
Anyway, while all this trolling is going on, fake Jean is coming to terms with the fact that she's fake Jean. Of course, she doesn't believe it at first, but a voice from the great beyond, aka the baby walkie-talkie in Nathan's room, alerts her to her true purpose. And it's none other than Mr. Sinister, who lets his influence flow through her like the hatred of the dark side by way of an evil Sims gem. I mean, come on, that's clearly what this is, right? This initiates the evil magical girl transformation scene. Our girl fake Jean becomes the Goblin Queen and begins to torment and torture all the members of the X-Men in the mansion by inflicting them with psychic evils and horrors that have never been seen in a show like this before. Each member of the X-Men is hit with torment made up of their mind's worst fears and some good old-fashioned Sinister brand nightmare fuel for good measure. From Savage Land Rogue and Magneto embracing while they literally melt into each other, taunting Gambit all the way, to concoction straight out of the ring wearing the head of Roberto's very disappointed mother. I'm not gonna give away all the illusions because some of these things just need to be seen and experienced in the moment. But trust me, the body horror, the nightmare fuel, all of that is on point. Eventually, the whole group fall into a recreation of Dante's Inferno and they're surrounded by a bunch of flying demons, leading to our first actual fight scene in the episode, and damn if it isn't a good one. This time the MVP award goes to Bishop, who gets supercharged by Cyclops' optic blast to unleash some energy hell into the demons flying overhead. Good thing too, because from this moment forward, Cyclops will barely be at functioning capacity, emotionally speaking. Eventually, the real Jean Grey stands up and descends like a psionic angel to restore peace and order as only she can. Never send a physical fighter to do a psychic's job. As the team recovers, Rogue and Magneto return from their training to find the house and the team in shambles. And after a quick overview about how much of a piece of shit Mr. Sinister is, given to us by way of Morph, Magneto splits the team in two. One part will tend to Jean, the other half will go after Sinister and save baby Nathan because fake Jean is the Goblin Queen now. She said, fuck this shit, I'm out, yo baby mine now, bye bitches. Now, when they go to rescue baby Nathan, this shit gets turned up to 1100 gabillion, okay? The X-Mansion Hellhound smorgasbord was just the beginning. There's so much horror in this episode, I love it. Look, I'm an October baby. My soul is obligated to love all things spooky pooky, okay? The showdown in the gothic Sinister church, the use of Dutch angles that I know everyone hates, but they were really used well in this episode. The Goblin Queen shows up decked out in full vampiric outfit fashion, which, while not a complete recreation of her comic book look, is very faithful and true to what it actually should look like, because she came to serve cunt with the side of TNA, you're welcome. The fight between the Goblin Queen and the X-Men, this is that good shit. This is that good shit. They are no match for her. No match for her at all. Morph runs in and tries to fight her as Magic, and what does she do? She mind controls Morph and has Magic turn into her Dark Child form. Remember what I said earlier, these people are real X-Men fans. Not even your boy Magneto, who we've barely seen break a sweat this series so far, can stand up to the Goblin Queen. As she says in the show, he can control metal and magnetism, but she can control everything. All stand the Goblin Queen. All stand, all hail. Cyclops does get in one good hit with his optic blast and actually draws blood from her face, which she just licks off of her lips. Told you, vampire. But that's pretty much it. These guys have no chance. Meanwhile, back at the X-Mansion, Wolverine is tapping into his tender side as he cares for Jean, which I actually really appreciate. Last time we saw him be the same way when it came to rushing Jean to the hospital when she was in labor. And now we see him really showing his soft side with Jean. I love what they're doing with him so far. He's not pining after Jean necessarily. He's not hitting on her. He's not trying to take her. He knows that's Scott's woman, that's Scott's wife, and he's gonna respect that. But he's also still madly in love with her, and those feelings don't move him into aggression or some misplaced alpha male energy. It just has him genuinely care for her. He's helping her to even be able to use her powers simply by having her focus on his voice and his mind and the love that he has for her. See, told you, this show knows how to slow down when it wants to. 10 out of 10. And it can't happen a moment sooner because the team is completely getting anally obliterated by the Goblin Queen. Jean sits up, ties her hair in a ponytail, and says, "It's time for me to step back in." Beast's like, "Hold on, you ain't going nowhere? Your body's in no shape to fight." She like, "Who said anything about a body?" And she uses her psionic projection to psychically go and fight the Goblin Queen on the astral plane. Can you say, bitch?
Give it to me.
Now, their fight in the astral plane really isn't so much a psychic showdown. It's more like Jean is trying to reach the Goblin Queen and get her just to see that she doesn't have to do all this. The Goblin Queen actually fires back from a place that I think makes sense. I'm the real Jean. I'm the one with all these memories. We both got these memories. Can you tell which are yours and which are mine? And Jean Grey, she goes through and brings up all these memories from their first meeting with Professor X to the moment that Nathan was born. She's the one who felt that sense of overwhelming accomplishment, love, and affection when holding her son for the first time. And that realization is enough to get the Goblin Queen to stop serving cunt and start serving a little bit of hero. She and Cyclops go in and bust in on Mr. Sinister's plan, which by the way involves dipping baby Nathan in a vat of sinister chemicals, which are introducing him to this techno-virus in an attempt to make him invincible. But because they bust him out early, the whole invincibility part never kicks in and he just kind of has techno COVID, I guess. I don't know. And you know he's sick because he got them little funky green rectangles popping up all over him. Y'all remember them from back in the day. Yeah, they're back and they bat like they never left. But that's not gonna stop the Goblin Queen and Cyclops from serving some serious and much deserved whoop ass down on Mr. Sinister. They blow a nice big hole in his chest along the way. I love when they would do this back in the day when it gets all acidic and shit. But Sinister does make his escape, leaving Cyclops and the Goblin Queen to tend to baby Nathan. They take him back to the X Mansion where Beast says that he is unable to help him. The virus is just too strong and too advanced for him to do anything about it. Their only hope lies in the future. It just so happens that Bishop, being a time traveler who has a recently repaired time traveling device, can go to the future where he will meet up with a man who can quote unquote build anything. Put a pin in that because it will be relevant in a few more minutes, and get Nathan a cure. So Cyclops and Jean, both Jeans, have to now say goodbye to their son and potentially never see him again. This news brings Cyclops onto the verge of a breakdown. He gives this great line about not wanting to abandon his child like his father did, which was so real. Not only is it a reference to Scott's abusive childhood, but it's also a very real moment that I think a lot of parents and guardians can relate to. The chance to right the wrongs of the past, to break generational curses by being all to our kids what we wish the previous generations of parents and grandparents were to us. Either way, Cyclops can't be a part of this, but the decision is made. The artist formerly known as the Goblin Queen then imparts baby Nathan with a mental message of motherly love before Bishop heads back to the future with baby in tow. This is followed by clone Jean herself departing from the X Mansion. After bidding Jean proper a farewell, she renames herself Madeline Pryor and embarks on her new life, no longer a part of Sinister's machinations or the identity that she once thought was her own. So, all this is well and good. Loving basically everything about this episode. But what about Storm? She recently departed from the team as well. Now that she's been depowered, she feels like she no longer has a place among them. So where is she? As of the last scene of this episode, she's in Texas, knocking back cold ones in a bar somewhere. When we see her, she is rocking the full punk look, which I think the mohawk fits much better than the white bodysuit X-Men outfit that she's been wearing up until now. I also love how this look contrasts with the pantsuit that she was rocking in episode 1, as well as the casual pink lounging outfit that she's worn around the house. It's clear they're leaning heavily into the whole identity crisis theme by incorporating this look while Aurora is separated from the team, and separated from her sense of self as well. This is a perfect, solid recreation of her punk look from the comics, save for the whole mane that she has back there going on with the mohawk. Look, I know this version of the mohawk was used in the old show. The whole wavy look that it has now, which someone in my comment section called the vanilla ice cream cone look, it's not really giving Storm punk, it's giving more Supreme Kais from Dragon Ball Z, and I don't know, it's just, I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. But I do like it a whole lot more now that she has the punk look from the neck down to go along with it. But even in the comics, her friends and teammates took to her new look with several raised eyebrows, to say the absolute least. And while we as fans are familiar with Storm donning such attire, it's the complete opposite of what she's worn in the animated series up to this point, save for that one time in an alternate timeline or alternate future or something from the OG animated series. So at least within this show, I think we can chalk this look up to part of her need to establish a new identity, as she really doesn't know who she is without her powers yet. But speaking of lack of powers, who would walk in but Forge himself? He's the one who takes her in immediately after she loses her powers, because she's so distraught and depressed and dejected that she's not even getting out of bed. He helps her get back on her feet and start to feel more alive, and part of that is a mutual attraction for each other, a mutual interest and a mutual care that they have for each other. He also designed the gun that was used to depower Storm in the first place, and when Storm discovers this, they have a humongous falling out, because of course they do. Now, we don't know how that's gonna be adapted in the show. It's safe to assume that he probably had something to do with the creation of the gun that the Executioner used in the show. That would be the most straightforward way to adapt this, given the current plot points that we've already seen. He may have even been the buyer that the FOH members were talking about in episode 1. Also, remember earlier when I said put a pin in something? Well, if you've watched the original show, then you know that Forge is actually a character who was seen frequently in the future. And his mutant power is actually the ability to understand and create complex machines. This is who Bishop was referring to when he said he's gonna meet a man who can make anything. I've even seen a couple videos on YouTube discussing this episode who think that Bishop may have sent a message back in time to current Forge so that he would know to go and help Storm. And if that wasn't enough, I have another prediction for where I personally think this is going. Earlier I said that this whole Storm Powers deal is huge, and I really hope it's something that we don't just yada yada our way through. And that's because there's so much that happens between Storm losing her powers and Storm regaining her powers. And one of those things is her assuming leadership of the X-Men, taking the place of Cyclops. In the previous episode, episode 1, we have Storm definitively recognize that Cyclops is the leader. She says this when they're playing basketball at the end, right before Magneto makes his debut. We all know she's a take charge person. We know that she has that, but she also respects the existing chain of command. However, just like Storm being acknowledged as a goddess and an Omega level threat was part of the setup for her losing her powers, I think this might be part of Storm's ascension, essentially, into eventually leading the team. She goes from saying, "You're the leader, you're in charge," to her eventually being like, "No, it's my turn." I also think that this is what's gonna happen because we're seeing Scott break down over time. The loss of baby Nathan, the whole thing with the Goblin Queen, he's questioning his ability to lead constantly. And this is only making all that worse. I think what we're gonna end up seeing over the next few episodes is Scott begin to completely break down to the point where he's no longer fit to lead. Either he's going to consciously say, "I can't do this no more," and then she's gonna step up, Or they may even recreate the duel that they had where Storm bested Cyclops in combat. They're only knocking her down so they can lift her so much higher back up. Now, before we end this video, we got to talk about some X-Men bars. You know I'm gonna talk about them X-Men bars. Let's go over a couple of them. The first one comes from Sinister himself. It's the poem or the nursery rhyme that he gives right before he bows out of the episode.
Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home. Your house is on fire and your child all gone.
That to me sounds like he's talking directly about how the X-Men, and Cyclops in particular, are in such disarray after recent events. And the child all gone part is obvious. I think that's just him talking about the fact that Nathan now is doomed because he got the techno flu. And even if it's not him dying, it's the fact that he is going to be separated from his parents. Next up, we got to talk about Cyclops' line while he was wrestling with the choice of whether or not to send Nathan to the future with Bishop. He says, "Don't any of you know how it feels to be abandoned? I won't have him feel that." I love this line because of how raw it is. Logically speaking, of course, the others know how that feels. They're all mutants who've been hated, hunted, persecuted, and rejected by their families and by society. And Cyclops knows this, but in the moment, all he can feel is the pain of his childhood and the guilt he feels for sending his son into a future that does not include him. There's one more that I just want to throw in just for good measure. And for this one, I'm not even gonna say it. I'm gonna just let the queen herself speak.
Look at you, a villain playing dress up as a hero. I should have you as a toy.
I love this line because of the way she delivers it, the look on her face. I mean, threaten me harder, mommy. Also, the fact that we're talking about the X-Men, who had one of the biggest toy lines of the 90s while also having one of the biggest cartoons of the 90s. I mean, I personally had at least 3 different Magneto action figures, so understood. But that's gonna do it for today's episode and this week's recap. Let me know how did you feel about this episode, and then after that, click this video on the screen right here so we can get more X-Men and Weather Witch goodness in our life. And until next time, keep simping.